be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have with me a very special guest, the man, the myth, the legend, back again, Joe Ferraro. Thank you, Joe, for taking time to join me today. It's a pleasure to have you on.
What a pleasure. I mean, I've had a couple of return guests on the podcast, and each time I say that, they feel obliged to say, well, thanks for having me back. But I get to say it now, so thank you.
Oh, awesome. Is this the first time you've been a second-time guest on a podcast?
I can't reveal that because it says a lot about my inability to close a deal, so I can't specify that at this time. Let's just say I'm excited to be here.
Oh, very, very good, very good. Well, we'll start with this then. I know you like generating themes for the start of your school year, but how, in year 24, do you top best year ever?
Well, I'm bringing that shirt back for anyone who missed it the year before, so people it's new to them. We have a lot of new staff. I don't know. In the running right now is Lasso, just to see to mess with people's minds, just going that way. I saw a shirt that said Viking Nation the other day, which was really crisp. But for those who are just kind of jumping in midstream in that story, I do think it actually says something about my quirky personality at times, which is we were ordering shirts for the upcoming year, a year and a half ago, and they said, add your last name to the back. So that seems easy enough. I've never forgotten my last name. F like Frank, as my mom would say, Erraro. That would be easy. Then I said, well, you could put anything you want on the back. It doesn't have to be a last name. So I had enough characters to write best year ever as kind of a mantra. And now I even look at it as that sign in the neighborhood bar that says free beer tomorrow. It's like perpetual. You show up tomorrow and then it's there. Best year ever. So I may run it back.
I like that idea with the bar stuff too, because it does. It works every year. You can always be improving. Obviously, with the name 1% better, that's kind of in line with what you do. But is this the first year where incoming students said that you were kind of old?
Oh man, kind of old, and the girl doubled down on it. I asked the kids to ask me any question that they wanted, and needless to say, today we started working on what makes a good question. Literally today, and it's interesting to cross those worlds over. One girl, as I approached the 9th grade students for the first time in a number of years. It's been over a decade that I've been working with English 12, and I'm very bad with time, I've learned, because I was like, yeah, I've been doing English 12 for 5 or 6 years. And then I saw a student contact me yesterday say, I had you 11 years ago in English 12. So it's going by. And the girl says, even though you're kind of old, do you have any life goals? Which is just great on the front end, awesome on the back end. I can't hit her with like the James Clear systems over goals just yet because it's September, but like that'll come out at some point. Hey, I'll make up a name. Hey, Becky, like when you said that, you weren't thinking like, I don't really set goals, but I have targets. My friend Charles and we have a complicated relationship with goals. It's more about living to a standard, and we can go a lot of directions, but I don't know. I'm 44. It's year 24. Maybe I'm a young old guy, and maybe I'm an old young guy, but I feel great. And a teacher said to me the other day, when are these freshmen going to mature? And I just threw my hands up. I don't know what the question means. Yeah. I mean, I'm loving that enthusiasm. Like I'm not putting someone down for not being up for that silliness, but I went to ninth grade to have an injection of life, and it's been unbelievably awesome so far.
Well, on the line of questions, and it's interesting because we're talking about asking damn good questions, working with your brand and stuff like that. The first question I asked was a little more open, right? This one was a closed-ended question. Is this the first time? But because I know who you are, I knew you wouldn't just go, yes. Right? So talk to me about the dynamics of asking questions with open-ended, closed-ended, and then some of the nuance that goes into that as well.
You and I are two of the people in this world that really nerd out over question construction, and it's actually an interesting perspective, because the more I think about close-ended questions, I'm beginning to think they're not as bad as maybe I have said they were, maybe that we've talked about and we've been led to believe, particularly when you know your audience and you know your guest, you know your partner, right? If you're not on air, you're home. It's really about not ending it with right, not ending it with something where it's just a dead end. Sometimes I've been finding myself going to those closed-ended questions, knowing the person's going to elaborate, and it feels like exactly like you did there. If we're both adept at conversation on some level, it's hard to put into words, but I think it can work, and it's almost like pointed, and obviously it worked like a charm there. So I think the more you and I together separately study the power of questions, we realize that they're all tools, right? A hammer works best in one way, but in a pinch, you could use it for something else. So, or maybe the better example is the screwdriver. You want to screw in a nut or a bolt, but you could use it as a hammer if you had to. It's not ideal, and every once in a while you would. And I think questions can serve purposes like that. So I always love thinking about that.
Yeah, I almost have been lately thinking about it more as like the closed-ended questions, like my cleanup hitter. Like I want to set up with open-ended questions and then know that if it gets to a certain point, I can lean into a yes or no based off of how I started, and they're going to clean it up. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of like one of those operational things that I'm not going to start my conversation with a closed-ended question, but I might clean up, let them knock in some runs, that sort of thing.
I like that analogy. The one that I think is probably more detrimental from a predictability standpoint is when we give people multiple choice. When I say, hey, that paint color is nice in the background. Were you thinking about going that, or did you have a different color in mind? Or maybe were you thinking about going white? I've found, and I haven't scripted this out, but I would say an overwhelming majority of the time, the person will say both. Yeah. You've given two choices. Observe that. For people listening, the next time you give someone a choice, track how frequently they'll say both.
That's a very interesting thought right there, because I do find that when you give them options, they either pick one right away or both. Because there's not this, well, actually, I was thinking A, B, C, and then it came to this, and you're not going to get the story part because you've limited the imagination piece.
I've seen a lot of this from on podcasts where they'll say, Charles, you're working on another book and you're doing some public speaking. Which do you prefer, the public speaking or the book? Which one really lights you up? And it's almost impossible for you to just go, the writing, it flows out of me. You're going to be tempted to dip into both waters. What I really am interested in that question is something slightly adjacent. I would say, and I mean it, I would say, you have another book out. That's impressive. What's the secret recipe for writing a book that quickly? And now I want to go back and ask about public speaking. If I want a comparison, then I might frame it totally more dramatically. I might just say, you can only choose one for the rest of your life and make the stakes higher. You're either going to give public speeches and earn the money that you deserve for those speeches, or you're going to write books and be invited there. Which one do you choose? If that's what I really want, if my intention is to get you to choose, let's ramp up the stakes and go that way. Instead of this wishy-washy question where you're going to probably use some airtime and dip both. Now, for people who've never met me, this is pretty much how deeply I think about these questions on a daily basis. And I don't apologize for it. I'm going for it.
So if we were to transition now from all of this nerding out over questions, how does somebody who maybe doesn't have that same love fit into your new cohort that you got coming up?
This cohort, which I don't know, I said this on, I think, LinkedIn, that no one likes the word cohort. And like a couple of people stuck up for the word cohort. Like one person went into like the Latin and they were like, no, cohort starts with a seed. And I don't know what they said about a tree. To me, this is what it is. It's a I'm a teacher, I'm a learner, and I want to be with people who are teachers and learners. So I said, I can use the buzzword cohort, but what I've tried to do is with people like you, I want to be like-minded people that are interested in a little bit more community, but in organized fashion. I've often said like regular conversations should be more like podcast conversations, which is why I love doing this. You and I can talk all the time, but something about these headphones and this microphone locks us in and we get to a different place. I've seen it with my dad on episode 150. I've seen it with friends, right? We'll do a Voxer. So is up to a dozen people. I don't want to go more than that, and keep it in a place. Even 8 or 9 works really beautiful. I thought what was happening was people were going to sign up for lessons. I thought they were coming in to learn things that maybe I learned or experiences that I. Turns out a lot of what people wanted was twofold: a sense of community of people that were attracted to the same ideas and the same idea of learning. And they wanted me to lead the group and to kind of use my experiences as questions to ask them tough questions about their career. So we had people in the cohort that were launching podcasts. We had people who were improving podcasts. We had people who had no interest in podcasting at all, but even though they didn't realize it, were going for a new job. And then this cohort comes in handy. So I think it came into 2 categories. It was always lifelong learners, the people who were launching a project or people who were trying to get better at a project or improve something they're working on. It was just, that was the ethos. And then the fun that we had in the middle of it was phenomenal. So I think at this point of our conversation, you kind of have an idea if you want to hang out with people like you and me. And I think you do.
So here's my thought with this. So I'm curious where you went with this. You went with the damn good conversations as for launching the cohort. Do you feel now that you've done one that you might have been, or do you feel 1% better or damn good conversations is the right direction for this?
It's a constant thought in my head. I have one particular friend who says, when are you going to make a decision and be 1% better or the damn good conversations guy? And I'm like, it's a good point, but I don't think I've ever run from the fact that one of my absolute weaknesses is marketing. And I don't know, it almost felt like a dirty word when I started. And then when I would have conversations with people like Debbie Millman and Seth Godin, they made it seem like marketing was just basically telling people about what you offer. And if they like it, great. So there's nothing dirty about it. But a lot of what, and I think you and I have in common, is we both have that word project in our website. And it kind of gave me the freedom to say, if I want to pursue a project for this long, I will. If I want to pursue this project, I will. And somewhere in the ethos of Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram, I saw someone say, sometimes your niche picks you. And I think that's kind of what happened, Charles. I mean, I was literally interviewing someone, and after it was over, he said, do you have any notes for me? And you know what's incredible? The same thing happened last night. So finally, people are starting to say, hey, I think you're good at something. They told me, I didn't tell them. And it felt really good. And you know, to use an overused word, it felt organic because people just they weren't asking me, how do I get 1% better? They were saying, I like your podcast. How do you do that? How do you build rapport? How do you get Daniel Pink on? And you know this about me. I'm empty in my pockets. I'm not saying, well, pay $300 and you didn't get it. No, like email me and I'll give you the script. The cohort is for people who want to dive deep, who want to live in these waters, right? So like we'll do October 1st to January 1st. And I found that that's probably going to be even better to shorten it just a bit, the one that you and I took part in. And I think we can pack a lot in. We can be more efficient. We can really spend a lot of time together. But if somebody emails me and says, hey, how do you get Seth Godin on your podcast? I'll tell the story. But I think that cohort can be for those that go deeper.
So interesting thought here is, do you feel that people niche down too soon?
I've been hearing different thoughts on this. I guess I would need to think about what we mean by niche in that situation. All right. So I like wine, food, learning, travel, relationships, communication, creativity. I don't want to pick one of those. So that's where the 1% better came in. So that allowed me to interview people from all walks of life, whether it's a professional poker player or an actor. Damn Good Conversations came into play, where it was, hey, I love having these. What's the podcast about? Well, it's damn good conversations with interesting people. So I don't know. I mean, is that something you've spent some time thinking about, the idea of the niche?
Yeah, because I don't know if, like, people always ask, well, who's your audience or what's your niche? And I'm just like, I'm hoping everybody, because if you don't want to pursue excellence, or you don't want to pursue greatness, then I'm curious as to why. Because I feel like we should all want to be 1% better. We should all want to be on the edge of greatness. We should all pursue these. And then I get this, this feeling in my gut, like, am I too broad then? Am I not targeting anyone because I'm targeting everyone? And I don't know. I'm kind of in that place where I'm like, I don't think that that's the right thing to do. I don't think we all have to niche down. But at what point do we decide maybe I should go a little bit narrower? Maybe I should take a direction, go on a damn good conversations course.
Well, there's two thoughts that come to mind now that you open that up for me. One is our mutual friend Luke Croy with the New School Leader. Mm-hmm. So if you were to say to Luke, what do? He would say, well, we empower aspiring or current administrators to reach the new level of their profession, something a lot smoother than that. And what happens there is no one is signing up unless they're in that administration track. So it's that magnet, like, hey, if I'm a school custodian, I want to be 1% better, but I'm not going to Luke's cohort. And I think that's fantastic from his standpoint. Here's an interesting counterexample. Recently had a really kind gesture from someone who recommended me as a possible speaking coach to someone. And the person is going to audition to be a TEDx speaker. So the person has a TEDx talk coming up. And the person referring me said, hey, how confident are you that you can do this? And I said, supremely. I feel like this is something I would love to do. I'm not going to hedge my bet. I would love to be a speaking coach with someone that's doing that. Well, as we record this, where we're at now is the gentleman asked a very legitimate question. He says, listen, I saw your referrals. I saw the people that you've coached. And what I'm seeing is a sweet spot with podcasters. Help me understand what experiences you have with professional each. Well, you and I have coached each other in various ways, and you're on stage. So first of all, that's thanks in advance. That's a misinterpretation, and I'll defend it very, positively, of what we do as podcast coaching, right? It's not like because you're sitting down, I can't coach someone to stand up. Like, I coach people who sit down mostly, but what about the one take episodes that you do every other week? The guest, anything we've worked on together shows up in those takes. And I find the solo episodes to be more challenging than the interview episodes for me. So that's a form of public speaking that I've been coaching. So now if you want someone who has 30 TEDx talkers in his stable, that's not me. But damn, I'd be honored to have you as my first. And that's kind of where we're at. So the question is he only going to look at me as a podcast coach, or can I be a communication coach, which I pride myself in being?
No, I think that's a fair point. And I think that you nailed it when it comes to the storytelling that we do in our solo episodes is exactly what you're doing. You're just standing. I mean, we still have to work on our timing, our delivery, our tempo, our inflections of our voice, and how we tell the story. The difference is now, instead of doing it in front of yourself and watching just you, which is awkward as it gets, you get to see everyone else stare at you. So there's a little bit of both ways there. So what I want to do here is I want to dig into the cohort a little bit, because I absolutely enjoyed my time in the cohort. I felt like I got better. And again, I'm not somebody who was trying to start a podcast or do all this. I was just trying to get 1% better, and that's why I joined this. But what I want to know is, what was something that surprised you from this first cohort?
Well, first of all, what surprised me was, even when people pay money, they don't always put in the effort that you put in. So if you think about, like, that's amazing to think about. I mean, and I've done it in my past. You buy a gym membership and then you don't show up. I mean, I know that's never happened to you, but that's happened to me. People would make the investment financially, and it still comes down to hey, who's putting the work in? Right? Like you, and I'm not just buttering your bread, you put the work in. You sought out the one-on-one lessons. Some people did them more frequently than others. So I think that surprised me. The other thing that surprised me was the difference in who joined the cohort. I mean, we didn't really talk about names of people in the cohort, so I'll just speak in general terms. We had a stay-at-home father and baseball coach join the cohort, and most of his project was involved in launching a side podcast where he got to interview people, and you were very influential in getting that off the ground. I come to find out in our closing meetings, he, I don't want to say too much, but he won like some kind of like regional award for baseball coaching. And I mean, like, to me, they're interlocked, but I didn't see that person coming into the cohort. And, in some ways he was, an engine of that cohort. So again, my marketing inexperience comes through in a way, and I don't know, who's it for, what's it for? It's for people who are lifelong learners who want to be better communicators and launch a project or make a project better. I don't know if that's smooth enough for people, but what we had was those video chats that were incredible. People could be on the way to work and say, hey, I was thinking about this. We had some places where we would put resources and say, hey, I just heard Annie Duke say this. What do you think about this? Hey, Ryan Hawk had a podcast. What do you think about the question he asked? It was just so affirming, and to be there for people, that I think it was mostly a series of pleasant surprises.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So in what ways did leading this make you better?
It was really touching early on in the cohort. Like I didn't understand like this idea. My former principal said, well, you're a community guy, Joe. And I was like, am I? And he's like, yeah, well, I mean, you do alumni classroom where people come back, you stay in touch with your former students, you get involved in cohorts, you start a podcast community. Yeah. Like sometimes I need people to really spell things out for me. So actually, it made me just so appreciative that people would put their trust in me, right? Because you and I both know I'm not a salesperson. And I know like we can talk to our mutual friends and say everybody needs a salesperson. And yes, I sell my students to be in my class, and I get all that. But at the end of the day, I'm a teacher, I'm a facilitator in my mind. I'm not someone saying, like, I know I'm losing value is the best way I could say it, if you leave it up to me to like tell people how great the cohort is. Which is why I think it's so kind that you've done grassroots stuff and things like this, because it gives people a chance to hear my voice and say, oh, this guy cares about it. So I was really touched. That's first and foremost. And how did it make me better? It actually just sharpened my communication skills. There was one person that I was coaching, and I remember trying to get this person to do research like I do research and like you do research on the air. And about halfway through the first lesson, he goes, I got to stop you. I'm sorry. I just have no time to do this kind of preparation. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, that's what it takes. Like, that's the thing. And what ended up happening was through a series of conversations, I realized not everyone has to do the preparation you and I do. It's my preferred method. It's clearly your preferred method. But if we're going to be elite coaches, we got to be able to teach more than one way. And that's a real tangible way it made me better, because I said to myself, okay, well, this guy is a whatever, big time financial job, whatever the case may be. I got to be able to speak his language. I can't just, here's my process, you do it. No, he was like, what's the Spark Notes version? And while that does rub me the wrong way on some level, I told him, but that you're hiring me in a way to coach you. You're not hiring me to coach you to be me. And that was a massive shift that really made an impact on me.
I really like that thought process too, because I do spend a lot of time on some episodes preparing. On others, I don't spend as much.
Okay.
And
I didn't realize that.
But that's awesome that you don't realize that, because that means I'm asking interesting questions. I'm getting better at listening and following up, and I can do what I do by being ultra prepared, a little less prepared, or even not prepared. Because I've had conversations in the past where I'm like, man, I got to get a conversation with somebody. I don't want to just throw out something just wild and crazy. And within, 45 minutes to an hour, I can get enough information to ask some interesting questions and then see what they do to follow up and go that direction. So what are your thoughts when you hear something like that when it comes to my preparation and thinking that I did it one way and now I do it different?
Yeah, I don't know if I ever threw this idea at you, and maybe now's the time, right? With no net here, I often thought about doing X, and then you were going to be my guinea pig, because I was going to ask you in the network that you have to refer me to someone that you know would be a damn good guest on 1% Better, right? But it had to be someone I know nothing about. So you would say, I got a guy, I got a girl. They want to come on. Believe me, it's going to be good. And they're game for what you're doing. I don't want to surprise anyone. I want to tell the audience a little behind the scenes as an experiment. And I want to say, today I was referred to this guest and I promised I would not look one thing up. I want to interview this person live on air with zero research. Now, that's not what you're doing. You're doing 45 minutes or quick. Yeah. And that's what my client wanted to do. But I wanted to do no research. And if it fell flat, we would learn something. If I succeeded, we would learn something. The only thing that held me back was that I believe so deeply in this human connection that I wanted all parties to be on board with it. Like, I didn't want to turn someone's appearance into a game. But I think there's something to be learned there. So, like, we would have to workshop that.
I actually have someone who I think would be perfect for this. I really do. And the idea is very intriguing because if we are really good at conversations, if we are what we're trying to preach that we are, is that we're expert communicators, we should be able to at least put something together from nothing just by listening, by having a few questions in our tool bag that we can kind of lean into, that we know give me something to work with, right? There's certain questions, like if you were to think of one or two questions that typically kind of revisit themselves in episodes, do you have things that you kind of go, this is in my tool bag, and I go, I know I can lean into this if I feel like things are going astray?
I've been trying out the one more than once where I'll say, what's the most compelling counter argument to that point? Like you say, we're on the edge of greatness. Everyone can pursue greatness, but what's the most compelling counter argument to that? So I'll say that. I kind of haven't workshopped this one out yet, but I was trying to explain it to a colleague today. I like this concept of chicken and the egg, like what came first. So I'll say something like, what's the chicken and the egg story behind you becoming a decision strategist versus a poker player? Like, where did that, trying to get an order of operations? I like that. What do people misunderstand about you? I usually say that when in my classroom. What's one thing that people misunderstand about you? You think they think you're this way, but you're really that way. Those are the ones I think about a lot.
I think those work, and I think that's what's nice about those is they all made me think in the moment. So like that's the idea, is if you can have a couple questions in our bag that even like icebreakers, something that's funny or quick, or one of the people in the cohort had the really good this or that. That was an amazing start to a conversation, and it's a beautiful thing because if you don't know somebody, you go down that rabbit hole and then you hear something interesting and you go, yep, that's where I'm going. And so becoming better at our communication skills, and that's something I picked up from him during the cohort, is I don't have to ask a specific question. I can be very general and learn some things, and then that opens some doors to me to go, well, let's take this path and see what happens. And I find that to be very interesting. So how would you, because I know you like high velocity questions to start things off, how would you start a conversation with somebody you didn't know?
Well, let's see. I'm wondering in this example, would we go? Let's make up a name. Here's my friend Sheila. She is a hedge fund manager. Would you tell me that, or would it be just completely blank slate? Because if it's blank slate, it's probably like, Sheila, nice to meet you. I'm Joe. Welcome to 1% Better. Oh, hi. Thanks for being here. What do you do? And let's go from there. All right. Yeah. That's not a great question, but if you're going in almost game show style, let's start there. And then I had this question rattling around in my head a few minutes ago. One of the people that helped me get into the podcasting world at large was a guy named Jack Warren, who had the Top Coach podcast, a baseball podcast. And I don't think he asked the question anymore, but he asked me on air, what did your childhood smell like? So imagine Sheila comes on and I say, Sheila, nice to meet you. Welcome to 1% Better. What did your childhood smell like? And and we're just like it's just we're off and running.
So what did your childhood smell like?
I think well, can you say cigarettes on a TV on a podcast here where we have video? My mom is and was a smoker. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, and that was a piece of it. So I unpacked that at a later therapeutic date. Aside from that, though, it was incredible baked have from the restaurant. My parents still do own a restaurant, so I'll say some combination of like oil and garlic, cigarette smoke, and baking bread. So that's a hell of a puzzle.
Yeah, no, that's quite the image right there, for sure. So let's circle back on track here with the cohort a little bit, because I want to dig more into that, because I found that it was very interesting. I want to do one myself. I think there are people who listen to this who would love to have the opportunity to do one in the future as well. But what do you hope someone going through your cohort gains by being in your group?
Experience, to speed up the learning curve, to save someone years. I have a mentor who's Canadian, and we would talk, and he would say, "Joe, I'm saving you years of your life, not weeks, not months, years." And I'm like, this took me years to learn. So we want to speed up the launch, whether that's a podcast, whether that's a business, whether that's a coaching client, whether that's having a better conversation with your partner. We want to kind of be mistake erasers, right? Like we want to learn from mistakes, but I don't know what baseball coach it is, probably Joe Madden. Never make the same mistake once. You can learn the mistake by watching it, by hearing it. You don't have to make the mistake yourself. We know we learn from mistakes, but let's learn from my mistakes. Let's see what we could have done differently. We kind of speed it up for people. And, the sick part is if we don't learn anything directly, the richness of the conversations, the collegiality, the lifelong friendships, it sounds corny, but that alone is worth it. And I saw that for a few people. One of the people who signed for cohort 2 said, I'm in coast mode. I just need something. I'm coasting. I need something. Well, this is something, because we can gear it towards what he's looking for. And, that's something really special.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the relationship piece, I'm still in contact with Lute. We're working through some things. We're trying to figure out a few things on how I can add a community piece to what I'm doing, because that's a big part of what I see a lot of successful podcast hosts doing. And what I want to do is build that community and do it in a certain way that's different than other people, but how can I figure that out? Because now you've got your community, you're doing it through the cohort. I want to do it through a little bit more of an online monthly thing, and we'll see what that goes. But I wouldn't have had somebody to bounce that off of without this. I wouldn't have known where to go to start to ask questions and lean into, because I think I started by asking you directed me to Lute, and then now me and Lute are going back and forth. So there's that extended benefit of being a part of a group that's been on a path together, that you can kind of lean back into them when things start to come up, which is kind of cool as well.
Totally. One of the people we mentioned earlier said that if he got nothing else out of the cohort except this one introduction I made, he thought that was worth it, which just reminded me I owe him another introduction. So I got to do that this weekend. I have an elusive friend that needs to meet with him, but it's weird, because I think you and I are on this journey together from this standpoint. I think when we first heard networking, it sounds like such an awkward word for people like us, but let's take that word out. Don't even use that word. Me being able to introduce you to Lute, one of the smoothest strategic communicators I know, it pays dividends in a way. Like I said that one time, I go, we're going to have LGO on the Zoom call, Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and she's going to open up her books and tell us how to get paid to speak. My goal was to make that worth the whole price of the cohort. We're going to continue to do things like that. But the introduction, you might be talking to Lute 5 years from now. Like, what is the price of that, right? Like, you can't put it on there. Like you and I meeting for lunch in Columbus, Ohio, leading to this day, like what's the dollar amount of that relationship? I can't come up with one. So whatever the cohort investment cost is, if I can guarantee you those type of relationships, and it was weird. I don't think of myself, and again, some people have to spell it out for me. I don't always think of myself as a connector. That doesn't necessarily the first thing I think of, but over the years, I've been able to do that. And it really, again, I'm a community guy. I don't know if that's all I ever get from that former principal. That's an amazing thing that he told me.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely a connector. And the facilitator piece, I think, is also something that you do very well because you tailored this to a whole bunch of different personalities doing very different things. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, based on the interactions of others, they all got something out of it. Everybody was moving forward in their project, even though everyone's project was completely different. I don't think anybody was on the same path.
Yeah, you're right. And I think I have to credit being in education for that, right? I think sometimes I'm wary to say, well, I'm a teacher, but are they going to take me seriously as a podcaster? Or I'm a podcaster, are they going to take me seriously as a teacher? But the more that conversation you referenced a few times with Brian Levinson, a few chats with you, with the cohort, that alignment, putting those two together has been big because, we'll do icebreakers, human highlighter, community building in these classrooms. You can't, I'll look around my classroom and I'll see 10 different racial identities. I'll see, people of all walks, and we got to build them together in a very short time. Today, as we finished up our creative writing third week of school, we had 3 people read their pieces about their name history. One talked about how she used to hate her name and wish it was plain. One talked about how he lost his father when he was 8 years old and his father named him. And one talked about the fun-loving side of her full name being shortened to a nickname. So in the span of 40 minutes and under 3 weeks, we're able to get people to a place where they can comfortably share a piece of writing like that. That's, and you're not talking 3 full weeks. I think it's 11 days of school or something. Like, it's something I take it for granted sometimes, but that's all community building. It's all walks of life.
Yeah, no, I think that's an impressive thing. And I think that's the key component to what you do is that community building, that trust. People lean into it. They feel good. They feel confident that they can go forward and say things to you. And then it turns into, let's go and solve some problems and get some projects done. And I think that's where the momentum's built and stuff like that. So, but how do you continue to improve this then? Like, because that's the hard thing I think that we all get stuck into is you had success in the first one. You're starting to build momentum in the second one. How do you keep from getting stale or being stuck?
Here's the moment where 1% better comes back. Because the original talk where I saw James Clear reference, I want to forget the guy's name, David Brailsford or David something. He was a cycling coach. He talked about if we could make the seat a little lighter, if we could make the tires a little thinner, if we could make the brakes a little quicker. That was the marginal gains. So I want to use that exact analogy in this cohort. I want to have a better website to host it. I want to have a Notion document instead of a Google Doc where it's easy to click. I want to maybe have more merchandise so everyone feels unified. Like, everything just 1% sharper, and then repeat the stuff that worked, right? Like, I did it on a hunch that the video conferencing would be key, and I think it ended up being vital, right? And I think that's got to stay. Maybe there's a smoother way to do it. Not reinvent the wheel, but just take each part of it and just kind of extrapolate it out. How do we make that part 1% better?
Love that. Love that. So tell me a little more real quick for the people that are listening. The new cohort starts October 1st. How can they reach out and get a hold of that? And then we'll kind of wind down here after we get through this.
Well, first of all, we did not plan this in advance, but I think I want to be one of those guys that gives a discount to anyone who heard about the cohort through the edge of greatness. So just mention you heard that here, and there will be an automatic discount. I just always wanted to say that.
There we go.
in the meantime, if you have any interest in joining the cohort, at this point, if you're still with us, it's probably something you're saying, this sounds awesome. I don't have time. Let me be the one that tells you whether or not you think you have time. And I'll be honest with you, because I turned someone away recently because they said, hey, I'm ready to do this. And I said, wait a minute, tell me what's going on in your life. Because I learned from specifically one person in the cohort, if you have life events going on, like major life events, marriage, major transition, that's not the ideal candidate. You didn't ask me that, but it just occurred to me. It's like, who is this not for? Okay, you're getting married this year. You're going to Hawaii for 6 months. You're going through a separation. let's put that primary. I'll be the one to say, no, I know this isn't going to work for you because we need a lot of devotion. That's something back to the top of the show. What else surprised me? You need time. You pour into it and you get a lot out of it. So that's the first thing. But you know me, I'm approachable. Joe at 1%betterproject.com. Check every email, respond to you. Let me know if you're interested. And it's as of now, a total virtual experience, right? But there's multiple. We have a Google Doc, we have video conferencing, we have Zoom calls, we have one-on-one meetings. You know, and I know that this is going to be at some point, probably an alumni event, right? Everyone who's been through the cohort, probably in Columbus, Ohio, because A, I had a damn good steak there, and I know there's other restaurants to explore. B, you're there. Friend of the show, Mike Deegan, is there. Friend of the show, James Clear, is there. We got people that we can contact and lean on. So put that into the someday maybe list. And I think that you'll get a good idea.
Yeah, no, I love that. I do have one more question. I was talking about having you on this. I was talking to somebody having you on this morning, and they actually asked a killer question that I don't usually do guest questions, but this one, I don't know. It spoke to me. So what is the most common challenge that you have to overcome to help people ask better questions?
I'm going to do a professional stall tactic by saying this. You and I are so aligned. The other day, I was about to interview Annie Duke, and I was going to Twitter, and I wanted to tell people, and I wanted to brag, and I was going to do one of those things where I was like, hey, I'm interviewing Annie Duke. Anyone have any questions for her? And I stopped myself. I don't think I've ever done that. Why would I no offense to anyone listening. You're beautiful. Why would I want to give you one of my questions when I have one shot at this apple? So I don't know if that makes me sound you were about to join the cohort, and I just told you no questions. That being said, what is the biggest challenge to get someone to ask better questions? I think it's probably trying to align your natural curiosity with a sense of purpose in the question. I'm really big on the backwards design model. What is it that we're trying to pull out from the question that you're about to ask? I still think about the question you asked me. And I have updates, by the way. You said, Joe, you have a Hotmail account, and it makes me wonder what else you hold on to your life. I have an iPhone 6. I have a car that just went over 220,000 miles, which, by the way, it almost quietly quit the other day, and I was almost teary. And the next day, I got it towed. Spark plug. Easily the greatest news I've ever had automotively. My wife, I hope she's listening. She won't admit to this. She was legitimately disappointed. She thought we were getting a new car. So I'm like, no, I'm like rubbing the car. But the point is, in addition to embarrassing myself, you ask those questions for what I call high velocity, multiple purposes. Loosen me up, make me laugh, make me think, get to a deeper place. I think, that's a place I love to play. To borrow a phrase from Brian Levinson, I love to play in the world between silly and serious, right? Like, Joe, you have Hotmail. It's not my only account, by the way, Joe, 1%betterproject.com, but I do have Hotmail. But also you followed it up with, well, what else does that say about you? So we're getting somewhere. We're not just throwing out what kitchen appliance do you want to be. There's a purpose behind it. So long answer to your question, aligning purpose, if you're lucky, multiple purposes with that natural curiosity.
No, I love that. And I think that's a perfect place to sign off for tonight. Joe, thank you so much for taking time to join me. I had an absolute pleasure as always, and it's always great to have you on. So thank you so much.
You are the man. Best move I ever made professionally. Asking Charles if he would pick me up at a hotel in Columbus, Ohio, and let's go to lunch. Man, it's been great getting to know you.
Absolutely. And that's a story for another day. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars. Fall flat on your face, but remember, whenever we fall, always get up.
Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness Podcast.